You know, this isn't just a history lesson. Think of it more as a parable. It's the story of a guy who looked at the entire field of medicine, which was, let's be honest, completely rotten with dogma, and he decided to just take a chemical hammer to the whole thing. So yeah, let's get into the incredible story of Paracelsus.
So to really get what a revolution this was, you've got to understand the world he was fighting against. On one side, you had the old world. Medicine was completely chained to these ancient texts from Galen and Avicenna. I mean, everything was about balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. It was a one-size-fits-all model that had been stuck in place for 1,000 years. But then you get the rebellion. Paracelsus comes along and champions what he called the light of nature. He had this radical idea of chemical empiricism. Basically, he was saying the answers aren't in some dusty old book. They're out there in the world itself, just waiting for us to find them.
So who was this guy? Well, his name was Theophrastus von Hohenheim, but we all know him as Paracelsus. His entire philosophy, his whole worldview, was built on this one really powerful idea. Nature is the ultimate teacher. Not ancient texts, not professors, nature itself.
And he wasn't exactly subtle about it. Can you imagine this? He stages a public bonfire and throws in the most revered medical books of the era, the literal foundation of all medicine. This wasn't just for show. This was a full-blown declaration of war on a system that hadn't changed in centuries. He was basically saying, we have to start over, right here, from the ashes.
Okay, but burning books is one thing. To really change medicine, he knew he had to go way deeper. He had to start from the inside out. His first major move wasn't about fighting the establishment. It was about redefining the human body itself. He was going to rewrite the entire instruction manual.
So here's his big idea, the tria prima. Paracelsus just throws out the whole four humors thing. Instead, he says we're made of three core alchemical principles. He saw sulfur as our soul, the fiery, passionate part of us. Then there's mercury, that's our spirit, the fluid, ever-changing essence. And finally, salt, which is the physical body, the solid, stable part. For him, being healthy was just these three things working together in perfect harmony. And getting sick, well, that was just them falling out of balance. It's such a different way of looking at ourselves.
And this right here, this is the whole paradigm shift laid out perfectly. Medicine goes from step 1, seeing disease as this vague imbalance of humors, to step 2, seeing it as a specific chemical problem with the tria prima. And well, if the problem is chemical, the solution has to be chemical too, right? That leads to step 3. The physician's job is now to prescribe specific chemical remedies, he called them arcana, to fix that internal balance. This right here, was basically the birth of pharmacology.
Okay, so theory is one thing, but what about the real world? We're going to move from the lecture hall right onto the battlefield. Because his ideas weren't just theories. They were forged in the most brutal place imaginable, the wars of Europe, where he was an army surgeon.
Now, the way they did surgery back then was, well, it was barbaric. The standard practice for a battle wound was to pour boiling oil into it to cauterize it. They actually thought that letting a wound get infected and full of pus was a good thing, a sign of healing. It was brutal, and it killed so many people. Paracelsus was just horrified by it.
In this quote, man, it just gets to the absolute heart of his philosophy. This is from his big book on surgery. He believed you couldn't learn about trauma from a book. You had to be there, on the ground, seeing it with your own eyes, observing what he called living anatomy. He definitely wore out a lot of shoes.
So what did he do differently? Pretty much the exact opposite of what everyone else was doing. First, he preached something that sounds obvious to us but was totally revolutionary then. Keep wounds clean. Simple as that. Second, he had this deep trust in the body's own power to heal, something he called the mumia, like a natural life force. He thought a surgeon's main job was to just help it along and get out of the way. And to do that, he started using ointments made from mercury and lead to fight infection. People thought he was insane, using poisons to heal. But it worked. It saved countless lives from sepsis.
But Paracelsus wasn't just a doctor. He was also a deeply committed alchemist. And for him, alchemy wasn't about the cliché of turning lead into gold to get rich. No, for him, it was a quest for something much, much bigger, the ultimate medicine.
Which brings us to a huge question in his work. What was he really looking for in that lab of his? What was this treasure of treasures for alchemists that he wrote about so obsessively? Well, it wasn't just one thing. He was after a whole series of what he saw as perfected medicines. I mean, listen to these names. The red lion, which was basically a drinkable form of gold. The green lion. He was chasing the legendary philosopher's stone, and something called the alkahest, which was meant to be a universal solvent that could dissolve anything. He genuinely believed that inside common minerals, he could find the secret to stopping death and decay and literally transform sickness into health.
And this is the most important part to understand. His alchemy was a sacred mission. The goal was never to make gold for his wallet. It was to distill and purify the essential spirit out of minerals and plants. He was trying to create a medicine so powerful it could preserve not just your body, but your very soul.
So that brings us to the final part of his story, and really the central paradox of the man himself. He spent his life writing about immortality, but his own life was anything but.
I mean, just look at the two sides of this guy. It's wild. On one hand, you have the legend, the epic mystic talking about the Philosopher's Stone and communing with spirits. But then you have the reality, which we know from, of all things, examining his skeleton centuries later. His bones tell the story of a hard life, of constant struggle, and of serious chemical exposure. He died a rebel's death, far from famous and far from rich.
So, no, he never found a potion for eternal life. But, in a way, he achieved something even bigger. He might have died a rebel, but his ghost, all of his radical, world-changing ideas, was instantly resurrected. The next generations of scientists, doctors, and mystics, they took his work and ran with it, carrying that torch forward and completely transforming how we think about healing.
And that right there is the moral of our parable. Paracelsus was searching for a treasure in a flask, for the Philosopher's Stone. But what his life really proves is that the greatest treasure, the real secret to changing the world, it's that relentless, unyielding, rebellious spirit of human curiosity.
Because when you really boil it all down, when you strip away the strange language and the alchemy, his questions are still our questions. How do we heal? How do we endure? How do we master the world around us? It's been 500 years, but in a way we're all still on Paracelsus's quest, still searching for that same treasure.